Welcome everyone to Stream Recap 5. We started off this one in the midst of yet another spicy battle against the natives. We have managed to push them back on all fronts to their last holding, Yankton, which seems like a sort of ironic name. This is our second stack we've actually sent west to try and deal with the last bastion of the Native Americans. They have thus far repelled us relatively easier with heavier losses on their part each time. Their strength and prowess in melee is something that we've really been struggling to contend with, and we've been struggling to keep them at that arm's length that we need to fire our musket shots. We had a quick congressional discussion in chat, and we decided that one of the best approaches we could make was to actually retreat away from the settlement and try to draw them out. We did do this, but as you can see, it did not have the desired effect. Once again with the natives, we engaged them in a pitched battle, but as seems to be the new norm with them, you have no idea where they're coming from other than perhaps a few units of cavalry. Our artillery did what they could from afar. Some of our new 24-pounder cannons showing what they could do, what potential they had, whilst our front line engaged in some low-firing round shot. We did put our skirmishers out in front of our line as they were intended to do, and the hope there was that we would actually be able to spot them as they came. But as seems to be, as I've said, the norm with the natives, they just seem to appear over the horizon in their droves. You'll see here at one point we actually charge our cavalry forward, and as they are approaching the enemy lines, you just see more and more enemies appearing. And I think our issue here that we're having time and time again is that we just do not have enough muskets bearing on them at any one time. So one unit will progressively be worn down as they come to you, however the unit behind them will eventually break in and get into the melee. So our front line here was pretty much scattered. We lost our cannons, our composure was all over the place. The line just couldn't hold. We did attempt to reform our line, as you can see here. We were going to move it over the other side of the battlefield and try and have a sort of last stand. But by the time we got there, our cannons couldn't quite reload in time, and some of the line infantry hadn't reloaded before moving. And sadly, I think it was just a lost cause. So this is the second army that the natives have managed to dispatch. We're currently raising a third and hopeful that this will be the last army we have to raise. We did manage to kill about half of their numbers, but unfortunately by the time we get back here they will have replenished and probably strengthened their numbers as they did from the first to second occasion. Whilst the Native Americans were at the forefront of our mind, we could not forget about the American Expeditionary Force that was now mopping up the last of France's allies in the form of Naples and Sicily, or the two Sicilies. The army itself was massively depleted, had fought multiple battles in quick succession without any real replenishment or reinforcements. So we found ourselves basically using a cliff face as a defensive point, so we could have multiple units pinning fire on the enemy at the same time, whilst our mortars and our singular working cannon with canister pumped out some serious fire. Through massive musket volleys we managed to drive back their professional soldiers that sallied out from the garrison, and I do believe in doing so we more or less terrified their peasantry to just dropping their arms and retreating. It was like someone had flicked a switch and all of a sudden the entire army didn't want to fight, and what little cavalry we had actually struggled to run down the remnants of the enemy units in time. In the aftermath of the battle with Sicily, we realised just how much we had stretched the effective combat ability of the AEF. Multiple units were under 100 men, and a number of cannon batteries had actually been lost in the battles. 3 turns with 3 successive battles before we could capture the town had worn them down. Some of our hawk-eyed viewers were able to clock a French fleet trying to cross the Atlantic with an army in tow. We managed to dispatch one of our new navies and sunk them to a man aboard the ships. Down in the South Americas, we had developed a new sort of infantry which was less in number than line infantry, but was more numerous than skirmishers. Adopting a hybrid doctrine of combat somewhere between line infantry and skirmishers, these units would be put to use shortly as we march towards the capital of Gran Columbia. Over in the east, we found ourselves landing with our army that was a veteran of the Texas campaign, the Mexican peninsula. They now found themselves over in the eastern Caribbean, attacking the north coast of South America. The puckle guns throughout the battle sat at pride of place in the middle of the front line, constantly unleashing volleys upon volleys of relentless fire upon the Colombian lines. This was a swift victory for us with very little casualties, which honestly made for quite a nice change of pace. The French forces in Corsica decided to sally out against us, which we welcomed. However, in this battle we were greeted by an unusual scenario. The enemy had artillery equal to our 24-pounders, raining Caracas and explosive shot down upon us for the duration of the battle, or so we thought. At one point the fire was so extreme that the decision was made to charge the congressional troopers at the enemy lines in hope of disrupting this bombardment. They managed to cut down multiple enemy cannon units before their attempts were thwarted and they retreated from the battlefield. Our mobile 3-pounder cannon line manoeuvred wonderfully throughout the duration of the battle, greeting the French at every turn with round shot and canister. The AEF, and specifically the Leffington and O'Bannon Marines, impressed as they have at every feat they've been presented with. Showing their manoeuvrability and prowess in melee are second to none, especially when supported by Slack's Rangers, whose ability to manoeuvre and continue firing has won us many a battle. As was suggested previously in a YouTube comment, we took a look at the trade nodes surrounding us and realised that every single one of them was occupied by someone, whether it be Venice, Denmark or the Portuguese. So we continued on our venture around the world looking for a trade node that would welcome us wonderful Americans. Then came the next wild card. The Russians, out of the blue, declared war on us. It was rumoured that they did not like our involvement in the Mediterranean and had a hunger for more than a single African colony. Then the old saying came to fruition: the enemy of my enemy is my new super best friend. The Swedes came knocking, and we decided that we would do more than ally them against the Russians. We would do more than simply stand beside them. We would give them all of our military technology we currently possessed and send an army as soon as possible to help them defensively. Then another old saying came up: the best form of defence is attack. Watch this space. The Colombians, in a last-ditch attempt to survive, decided to leave the relative safety of their last bastion of hope. During this battle, we saw our new hybrid doctrine units in action for the first time. These were sponsored by prominent Senator General Peartree, or General Patry, as some know him. They took centre of the line in a scattered formation behind previously placed wooden stake defences to deter cavalry. They would continue to sit here for the entirety of the battle, absorbing little damage while firing devastating volleys from a crouched position. The whole time, Puckle firing overhead and causing massive morale damage to the enemy. We would take the fort knowing that our new infantry, along with their new idea and their new doctrine, were definitely the future of warfare. It was decided by Congress that the time had come for us to send another army towards Yankton and our native menace, with a scout force, this time to survey the enemy, and also act as reinforcements. As our trade navy, laden with goods, travels around the world looking for ports that are welcoming our trade, we realise just how late we are to the trade game, and wonder, will we ever be able to set foot into this market? The AEF were sent upon their next objective: dispatched from success in Corsica to free the poor, oppressed Belgians from their oppressive French monarchist overlord. Our somewhat outdated and battle-worn Mediterranean navy working overtime as a delivery service. We arrived and once again found ourselves outnumbered the exact way the AEF prefer it. The French once again had their own artillery, stationary mortars, which could outrange our now somewhat outdated cannons and mortars that the AEF had had since their first campaign. The French also boasted an overall numbers advantage, as well as having a number of elite regiments of the line in this defensive army. During the battle, we saw what remained of Slack's Rangers manoeuvre unseen and fire flanking shots into the sides of the French lines at every opportunity. The battle also saw fighting in the streets of Brussels, as the French chose not to spare the civilian population of the perils of the battle. As the battle was drawing to a close, the French, in a desperate attempt to protect their retreat, took up defensive position in a farmer's field cresting a hill. Using the boundary walls and high ground as cover, they attempted to buy time. However, a number of volleys from our elite marines, followed by a desperate melee brawl which emerged from the thick woods, routed them on the spot, with our cavalry running down as many of the French as we could. After the battle, we offered the Belgians the opportunity to become an independent country. They turned it down and wished to become an American protectorate, under one condition. We, instead of naming them French fries, called them Flemish fries, or as a sign of our new friendship and a gesture of goodwill, Freedom fries. We humbly agreed. In the aftermath of the Siege of Brussels, we saw an opportunity to remove the French Loyalist threat once and for all. We decided to press forward and take Alsace and Lorraine, the last holding of the Loyalists. As we scouted, we realised the Prussians were in fact watching the situation very, very closely, furthering the urgency to act now. We moved the AEF into position and realised that while the French numbers had dwindled, the remaining regiments were the creme de la creme. With the situation in Europe drawing to a conclusion, The long lingering conflict against the remnants of the natives carried on. We found our main army and the reinforcements cut off from one another and made the decision to attack the main settlement while our reinforcements acted as a deterrent to the south. This was the one. The second attempt to take Yankton, I could feel the glory that awaited this army. Would they succeed where two other armies had fallen? During the second Battle of Yankton, we tried to learn from our errors by having a deeper battle line with multiple layers rather than one long continuous line. We had spike traps in the front and skirmishers doing their job where terrain dictated. Our new invention, the puckle gun, also improved confidence. As the battle lines drew closer together, the enemy cavalry took the decision to charge straight at our defensive line in a confusing but bold choice. They quite honestly did not stand a chance and were gunned down or impaled as they approached us, perhaps leading us into yet another false sense of security. As the battle grew more chaotic, the advice of one of our senators got put to the test: Grenadiers versus natives. We used the grenades to devastating effect, and the melee capabilities of the Grenadiers made them more of a challenge for the native infantry to deal with. The first attack of the enemy was repelled with little damage to our own lines. This was surely the one. Then the natives, who seemed to specialise in guerrilla warfare, whose lands these were home, they knew every nook and cranny, started appearing from nowhere and charging our vanguard skirmishers. I thought to myself, let's not repeat our previous mistakes. We knew the enemy were hidden and still numerous, so we decided to take the fight to them. Using light infantry and their unique doctrine, we planned to spot the enemy as our cannons and mortars rained lead. Meanwhile, our infantry line would move up and offer a solid fallback line should we need it. Then the arrows started falling on our vanguard skirmishers from the woods. We knew roughly where they were, but needed line of sight. Next thing we knew, our spotters were in melee. Time was not on our side and the infantry line had to be prepared. We had no cavalry support as they were all stuck in our scouting army which had been ambushed. Our grenadiers once again wreaked havoc on the infantry as they approached us, breaking apart their formations, giving us false hope. It was at this point the pivotal mistake was made. Our generals, aka me, decided to move up all of our artillery and stop the constant bombardment that had been keeping the enemies at range. This gave the natives the opportunity to close the gap, and as we have come to know oh too well, they just started appearing, and before we knew it, we were in melee. We were on melee all across our front line. Then the batteries went silent, and I said it best myself when we were live. I've snatched defeat here from the jaws of victory, haven't I? The all too familiar sight came back to us. Our army, having killed 2 men for every man lost, started slowly breaking apart and retreating through our own lines. Panic took hold, and units that were well positioned found themselves firing through our own men towards the natives that were chasing them down. It had happened again. The curse of Yankton strikes. It was at this point that George Pierce, commander of the western frontier, remarked, "We are fighting in the unknown plains of this country, far from home. The natives, albeit a mere savage to us, are fighting for their home and their very way of life." As we go over our summary of the stream, we find ourselves looking over our central power area, which is largely unchanged other than the fact that some of the garrisons that were preparing to go across the rivers and the Great Lakes to fight the British now find themselves moving west. Our army has once again been routed up here, and you find them in pretty poor condition, likely about to be ambushed, hoping to retreat back to our scouting army, which is in station here within Quivira, one of the natives' universities, if you can call it that. As we move down to South America, we find ourselves largely in control of almost the entirety of the continent. The north coast is almost all ours, with the exception being one little Dutch province there. We are on good terms with the Dutch, so we might not be looking to do much there. The British possessions in the Caribbean are something we do have our eyes on, depending how they play out. And obviously there is also Dutch Guyana. Again, quite happy to let the status quo as it stands there. Down here, we find ourselves sieging the last of the French Loyalists down in Alsace and Lorraine. Be looking forward to bringing this theatre to a close and then seeing what we're going to do with Brussels as well as Strasbourg in terms of who they go to. So we move down here, we have control of pretty much the central Med. The whole area is unlocked. We have 4 good ports here for constructing military ships if it require. Our next issue we're going to be confronted with here is going to be to get an army here from Tripoli and go up to Tunis. Take that from the Russians who decided to declare war on us. The big threat to our game save, and also this world still exists in the form of the Ottoman blob, which now consists of 17 armies here of varying sizes. So this is something we'll probably look to send the AEF towards next. Thank you everyone for tuning in as always, and I appreciate all the support, the new subs, the likes, the comments, everything. Like, I really do appreciate it. I'm looking forward to streaming this again on Friday. So that will be the 30th, which is tomorrow. And we'll see what we can do in bringing freedom to the rest of the world. Thank you to everyone again, and I will catch you on the next one.